You're listening to Tapestry, a podcast by a music lover for a music lover. I'm your host, Kelly. Join me as I learn about the common thread that weaves throughout our lives, music. Welcome to episode 28 of Tapestry. Today's guest is Roger Romero, who is a Pittsburgh-based saxophonist and the effective frontman of his jazz and rock fusion project called Feralcat. Roger absolutely humbled me with his opinions on so many topics, but if I had to pick just three to reel you in, consider our conversation about the lofty weight of holding the title of jazz musician, emboldened by Pittsburgh's lengthy history of jazz culture, his defense of video games as a legitimate art and how they have inspired his present work, plus how his background in a multitude of careers has given him non-traditional skills useful for navigating life as a professional musician and educator, while directing him towards those very same careers. You're listening to Jaguar off of Feralcat's self-titled album. You are Mr. Roger Romero, also known as Feralcat, and thank you for being here today in my little home studio, and I'm excited to have you here because I also play saxophone. It's been a long time since I've touched it, but I guess this is kind of me going back to my roots.
Because I didn't know that. Oh,
yeah,
cool.
That was the first instrument I ever learned, so, but I wanted to reach out to you because I don't remember how I found your music. I wish I did remember, so I had like a cool story, but I don't. I forget how I found Feralcat, but I immediately fell in love with it, and I just want to learn more about you because your list of things you've been involved in and your background is just insanely fascinating. So why don't you tell me a little bit about kind of what you do, what projects you're involved in, and sort of how you ended up in Pittsburgh?
A few of those are connected, not all of them. What I do as of right now, I mostly teach and freelance. So I teach private lessons at a nonprofit. I also teach group classes and group programming at the jazz program at Center of Life in Hazelwood. And then I freelance as a saxophone player, typically with like whatever genre is needed for the time. So I'm relatively flexible there. How did I come to Pittsburgh? Well, I went to college here. Mm-hmm. I studied at CMU, and I stuck around because I was in a band that I was really working with and I was working hard with, and decided to make a couple of sacrifices. Could have taken a big wig, high-paying job out of town, and decided to rough it and struggle for a few months before I had any income at all, and then worked odd jobs for quite a bit while I was still in that band.
Was that when you were with East End Mile?
That's when I was with East End Mile,
okay.
Yeah.
I actually had known about East End Mile like months and months ago. And
no
then,
way.
Yeah.
That's crazy. There's no way.
Yeah.
How?
Well, because I curate an absolute like buttload of playlists on Spotify. And a couple months ago, I decided to make just like a non-genre specific Pittsburgh, Ohio, West Virginia type of one, just, for promoters and stuff, just to see the insane amount of talent we have here in the scene. And I was just kind of backtracking through stuff online, and I ran into East End Mile, and I'm like, whoa, this is, funky, like jazz fusion stuff. I love it because that's kind of what I grew up listening to. And then when I was prepping for this interview, I found out that you were the guy in that group. I'm like, okay, small world.
Yeah,
bizarre.
Not a lot of sax players. Definitely not a lot of sax players in town, but
really?
Well, the few of us that exist in like a circuit of maybe like freelance or maybe cover guys, like we mostly know each other. Mm-hmm. But I am always meeting new people. I guess mostly just like maybe I'm just an isolated freak and I don't actually meet anyone ever.
Well, so that's funny you say that because I watched that little mini documentary thing you were part of. It was very local.
Yeah.
And I really liked what you said, and I completely agree with you about the fact that Pittsburgh is sort of a unique city. It's not like LA, it's not like New York where everything's cutthroat and you're like, punching guys out to get a gig over someone else, where it seems like the Pittsburgh scene, whether it's jazz or even in my experience, definitely in the metal world, it's very like community oriented.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're sort of trying to do your part to keep it that way.
Yeah, I mean, as far as actually building community or like acts to build community, I feel like I'm still relatively limited. But I'm a active part of a group of musicians who, like, we have a space that we work with, and we invite people to perform with us all the time, and like we try and set up like intimate shows or like opportunities for like small groups of creatives as of now to like be in a space where these musicians are also developing and whatever else. So not like I guess I like said that as almost like an aspirational dream, like
if you say it, it'll happen.
Yeah,
that sort
like,
of thing. Okay.
Like, yeah, we build this community out of love and a sense of we are looking out for each other, and we're making sure that as long as one is uplifted, the others that are there either get their due credit or are uplifted as well, because as you're saying, there's so much talent here.
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot of unnoticed, just under the radar talent that people who are in this scene and people who are actively performing know. Like, they know who's good, they know what's up. And like the best part of being a part of that scene is that no one is unapproachable. Everyone's like, even if you're established, quote unquote, or if you've been doing this for a while, if you're like a new band or if you're a new artist, you probably have the opportunity to talk very closely with any of your favorites if they're local.
Yeah. Oh, I 1,000,000% agree with that. Cross genre as well. Is the space you're talking about, is that the Attic Music Group stuff? Okay, yeah. So you're the co-creator of that, right?
Yeah, I'm one of two others, so three of us. We've sort of taken a step back from doing what we have traditionally done as the Attic, and are regrouping to kind of figure out what we do with our new space and what we do in general. Because what we first started doing was just my roommate at the time, his name's Caleb, decided to build a studio in our attic.
Why not?
And I was like, I laughed at him. And I mean, with like, a little bit of hope in my heart, and that little bit of hope was plenty enough because he was already working. I'm like, all right, I'll help you. Like, let's do this. And so at first we were just bringing people in that we knew to like hang out and have fun. And then we met this incredible artist named Sierra Sellers, and we like all immediately connected. And my group of music, like, she was just an artist that was playing the backing tracks, and like my crew of musicians are like, we're musicians, we can actually like back you up if you want. Like, this could be a cool collaboration. And so that out of that came like a video series that we did in collaboration with artists that were around town. We would play as like the house band almost, and some of the players were interchangeable, but for the most part we like gathered a lot of the same musicians, and we backed up this singer, vocalist, rapper, whatever it was, and we either made a cover track, like an arrangement, a cool arrangement, or we worked on one of the original tracks and arranged it for live band. So that was super fun, and we did that for about a year and a half. We had taken a step back as of like March or something. Just, to be honest, I'm kind of not sure where we're at as a group, but I'm happy and proud of what we had done as far as like community building and just collective musician work and everything else.
It sure seems like, and I could be wrong because I haven't gone out to like a jazz show in a while, but it sure seems like Pittsburgh is opening more venues that are kind of jazz focused. Like, I know Karma, I'm pretty sure that was one of them, Thunderbird, some of those other clubs that are like just a little bit bigger and more accommodating. And I guess to me, plus my parents always talk about they've gone on some of those jazz cruises on the Gateway Clipper. Like, I think they've gone on 2 or 3 now. And
yeah, I've heard of those.
Yeah, and I was telling my mom, I said, I'm going to be interviewing this sax player. What do you want me to ask him? She loves jazz. And she's like, well, ask him if he's ever been on the jazz cruise. I was like, okay, fine. But it sure seems like with, that kind of stuff and James Street and all those types of venues that Pittsburgh is an extremely jazz-friendly city.
Well, Pittsburgh is like historically known for its jazz music. Some of the greatest of all time were like lived and cultivated their musical language and their musical personas in Pittsburgh. Notable names: Ahmad Jamal, Stanley Turrentine, Billy Eckstein, Mary Lou Williams. Like, I mean, like, it's. I'm
glad you're teaching me, because I know Stanley Turrentine, but the other ones no.
I mean, God, what, I can keep going, but like I have a blockage because I'm trying too hard. But like the point is that there's a lot of these great jazz musicians who had lived in Pittsburgh. A lot of them had to start moving around because their careers got bigger. Mm-hmm. But and that tradition hasn't really left. Like, there's still the great master Roger Humphreys, who was on some seminal jazz recordings from the 60s, lives and breathes the like history of jazz here. Like, he became a sort of like vetting process, which I've never actually gone through personally, because I'm not that I'm afraid of him. He's one of the kindest people I've ever met, but I'm sort of like afraid of taking on the grandiose task of being a jazz musician, because to be honest, I don't really want that title. It's a little bit like there's a lot of weight on it, because there's history and meaning and backbone, and I study the music, and I study it actively, because it's like, it's difficult, it's challenging, and it's also like really rewarding for me to play jazz music, and whenever I get a chance to, I do. But ultimately, Pittsburgh jazz is like just is powerful, and it's a mainstay, and I'm almost like afraid, because I came in almost as an outsider. I grew up in New Jersey, but I've been here for almost a decade, so I feel assimilated, but there's still a sense of outsiderness to me, and like to my presence within the music scene. There's plenty of it that's just in my head, but there's some of it that I hope actually rings.
That kind of makes me think of the movie Whiplash a little bit, just because you see like the process of almost like the gauntlet of what becoming a jazz musician one takes, to what it can do to a person.
Yeah.
and you think about the structure and like all the rigmarole and the training and just the process behind it. Like, yeah, I can understand why you would want to be a little bit step softly in that territory.
It's just the expectation is so much. And yeah, Whiplash has a lot of great examples of like jazz culture, right. Or at least the culture of being a student of jazz, because there's all this pressure, and you are constantly overseen by the greats, not just by like your mentors and the people who are teaching you, but you are listening, and you're absorbing everything, and you're learning, you're transcribing, as in you're like picking up at like the very specifics of what they're doing. And it's hard. It's really difficult, because you're building intuition. Like, that's not natural, I guess, or right. Maybe it is, but the way it happens is hopefully rewarding enough for most, and it's rewarding for me, but like, to give myself that title, I feel like I'm doing a disservice to the music.
So you went to the Carnegie Mellon not for music, correct?
That's right.
Was some of that fear or kind of that weightiness of that title, was that maybe something that made you not pursue music kind of academically, or did you just sort of see it as, okay, this is the thing I want to do outside of my career?
Well, when I went into school, I just... Yeah, kind of like what you're saying. I didn't have the idea of being a musician as like, this is how I create a career, or this is how I develop my life from here. My idea was to get a good, high-paying job. I felt a lot of pressure that I gave myself as like because I excelled in school, I did well, and then I continued to do well in college. And I was like, there were points in time where I spent like evenings and well into like the dead hours of the night, teaching my like peers concepts from my like engineering textbooks before like midterms. We would spend, a lot of it was collaborative, but I do remember like being up at that blackboard a couple of times in front of like 15 of my peers and being like, all right, this is how it works, I think.
Yeah.
So I was working at it. I was working really hard at it, but ultimately I kind of knew it would make me miserable, but I didn't want to accept it, and I took the longest time I could to accept that.
But you got your degree, and,
I got my degree.
Yeah, and I mean, I looked at your list just from other interviews and stuff. Your list of jobs is crazy. Like, you've worked as a chemist, you've studied engineering, you've done serving and restaurant industry stuff. So you've been bounced around quite a bit, and it seems to me now, just the way you speak about teaching music, that you maybe were like a late bloomer, and you kind of just had to finally come around to the idea, like, hey, maybe music is the thing I'm meant to do.
Well,
or the thing that it's going to give you fulfillment, perhaps, in your life.
I kind of always knew it needed to be there, but what really, like, I didn't cement the idea that I could pursue this as my, like, life. It took a while for that one. But, no, I think music was always there. I was playing music throughout high school, middle school, college. I never really stopped. Like, I remember being in my freshman dorm and going to like the common areas when they were empty and just whipping out my sax as if no one would actually hear it. Meanwhile, the entire building hears it.
Too bad. Everyone's hearing giant steps. Don't worry about it.
It was kind of funny because I definitely did that. But then I also met a couple of other musicians who would just wander in and be like, hey, let's play together. And that was cool and everything, because none of us were active musicians. All of us were doing it in high school, and then we're studying whatever else. So it kind of felt okay to be like that, and to pursue everything else while I kept music on the back burner. But it also hurt. It hurt to think that I was almost like wasting my time. There were people in conservatories in music and people who were just like working at their craft all the time, and I spent most of my days either studying or I was in extracurriculars that took up a lot of my time, and like I took on leadership roles, which took on even more time. So I worked so hard thinking that music would be a hobbyist kind of thing. So I worked so hard on everything else, but I just kept working hard on music too. So I was exhausted of it. And at some point, I'm like, all right, I just have to figure out how it works. I just have to figure out how to not be exhausted when I play music, you know?
Was there a particular experience or like period of time in your life that gave you that breakthrough? Like, what allowed you to not feel exhausted by music finally? And how long have you been playing saxophone too?
Saxophone, I started in 7th grade. No, 6th grade to 7th grade. One of those two. So either since I was 11 or 12 makes that 13 or 14 years. So it's been a while. Yeah. Definitely more. I've lived more with my saxophone than I have not. But I'm sorry, I forgot the rest of the question.
It was kind of like what was the experience that led to the breakthrough that kept you from feeling exhausted playing music?
Just finally accepting sort of the risks that were involved, because it was less financial risks. I was never like super stable, and I'd never created that stability for myself. And I guess that could have ultimately been something that showed me that, oh, I'm not creating stability with anything else because I keep pushing all of my extra income into music. But I stopped being exhausted when I just kind of like let myself love what I loved, and like let the personality of my playing show, and like stop worrying so much about the things that I had to do, and started thinking more about who I wanted to be and who I want. Like, I started thinking about goals. I started thinking about like, how could this be tangible? Right. How could it actually work? And I mean, there were a few steps that kind of made it more apparent. I started playing in cover bands, like a wedding band called the Bachelor Boys Band. Yeah, it's relatively prominent here in town, and yes, the name is funny. So many of the musicians are married.
Oh, nice. It's just my weekend gig.
For a lot of them, yeah.
Yeah.
But after doing that, I felt sort of like legitimized almost in a weird way, because I'd never had something that made me money as a musician. I'd always lost it up until then. And I started to find myself given more opportunities, and I could like put my foot down on certain things. Like, no, I don't want to accept that behavior. I want to, like, I think I know my worth, and I can choose to do this or that. And that's not like a permanent case. That's kind of like case by case, whether or not I can decide that something like an opportunity is for me. Sometimes just because of my own financial situation, like I just have to do it.
Right.
And even then, that's definitely exhausting, but I just feel like my problems have shifted. Like I just have better problems.
Have better problems. That's probably like a good takeaway for anybody.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out where they need to go in life is you're always going to have problems. Just eliminate crappy problems.
Exactly.
And give yourself better problems, I guess.
Just give yourself better problems. Like, I mean, the money problem still hasn't gone, but like now my worry is, can I fit 3 gigs into one night?
That's a good problem to have.
That's a good problem
as a working musician. And
not saying that happens all the time, but that's like something that I've had to think about recently.
That is a fantastic problem, because I mean, I hate to when I interview musicians, I really hate to start off an interview like, so is this your real job? But that's
Do you start that?
No,
sometimes?
gosh, I would no. I hate to phrase it like that. I usually say it sarcastically, because so many musicians, it's not that I don't think that music is a legitimate career. It's just that it's a sad reality that a lot of musicians cannot support themselves on a musical career. And I think it just takes a shift in mind to be able to.
I technically still don't make all of my income from performing, from being a musician, quote unquote. Like, I teach, I like record, I like, there are other things that supplement the income and that make up a part of this career, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, I think day jobs are great. I don't knock a day job ever, so long as it's not that you go home and you don't do anything afterwards.
Exactly, yeah.
Because if you have a day job that like really sucks the life out of you, then you're exhausted. That's where the exhaustion comes in. Everything right. That's happening is taking life away from you rather than giving it back. And so, I mean, day job, great, so long as it also leaves you energy to create and to do what you actually want to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, before I move on to other questions that are more Feralcat specific, I do think it's funny that you also host your own podcast called What Do You Do Again?
Yeah.
Correct? So, and I didn't listen to any of the full episodes, but I kind of looked at just some of the titles and the subject matter you talk about with your co-host, and it's extremely relevant because it seems like you touch on a lot of stuff like, you know, how to market yourself as an artist and how to prevent burnout and just a lot of those topics. When did you start that podcast, and like what stage in your career was that at?
It's so funny to even think I'm at a stage in my career. That statement just made me a little bit bubbly. But Jamie has been a close friend of mine for ages. So often I used to work at a marketing firm, like a small one over the North Shore. And Jamie is a painter, a working artist. So she would often be working in her studio, which was in Lawrenceville, and I lived in Highland Park, so it was like a good crossroads. I always kind of came by it when I was coming home from work, and I would like call her 5 minutes before, be like, "You in studio?" And she's like, "Yeah, but I can take a break." And we'd sit outside or stand outside, smoke a cigarette, and just talk about what we do. And at some point in time, I'm like, you know, we keep talking about these parallels we have between the way you live as like a painter. I mean, she also had other jobs. Right. And then like the way I live as a musician who also had other work, and just like the things that we navigate that are very, very similar, because they all kind of go under the umbrella of this is how creatives work. And I kind of wanted to expand on that. At first, it was just like us to talk about it and have a record of it. And then afterwards, we decided to bring in people to interview and talk specifically with folks that I don't have a lot of experience with. So, and I'd still go into it without preparation, which is why like you're.
Oh yeah, my 2 pages of notes with handwritten notes on top of my notes, but I don't usually reference them like crazy.
No, but I love it because it's like real preparation. It makes me like, it kind of inspired me. I'm like, I should probably start thinking about what I say before I say it.
I just want to sound like I kind of know a tiny bit about my guest, so it makes a difference though, I think, when it's like, hey, I found you, I'm already genuinely invested in your work, or at least I like the sounds your saxophone makes, so let me ask you about that, versus I've had people like find me out of left field and I'm like, you sound cool, but I'm not sure this is like in my heart. It just, I mean, maybe we'd have a really good genuine connection in an interview, but it's a struggle to do it. Though I imagine hosting a podcast with a good friend already probably changes the comfort level and like sort of the questions you ask.
The questions just come naturally, and also it relieves the pressure to always be the conversationalist, because I can listen, and then I can listen and formulate my own thoughts and interject when I need to, and often I'll come up with like the other two will be talking, Jamie and a guest, and then I will just be formulating my questions. Right. Like thinking, and I'm like, oh, actually, we might not have time to get through all these questions. So it's great because now we don't have a natural stopping point, or like an awkward stopping point. It comes down naturally. That
is honestly the hardest part of interviewing, is I have all these things that I've written down. I'm like, well, I want to ask him about, his dad and these other places he's gone and things he's done. And then I'm like, you can't possibly predetermine how all of those subject points are going to match up. You just can't, or else your interview is going to come across as just concrete and boring. So that's not my aim, but you have a lot of things to talk about, so I was trying to make sure I at least got to most of them.
Glad my story is like concise enough. Did you have to is this sources on sources on sources?
No, I mean, I know the City Paper interviewed you. I think the Post-Gazette, maybe it was. And then actually right before you came over, again, this is a small world Pittsburgh music scene at work, but I had no idea that First Angel Media covered your album release back in June, and I'm tight with all the First Angel Media people. So, well, like I'm wearing my Raina Z shirt right now, and I've run merch for them, and they're all close with the First Angel people. So
okay, that makes sense.
I just thought, oh, that's so strange. You're kind of in the jazz world, but I usually think of them as covering mostly like heavy metal rock stuff. Though I guess with Feralcat there is a fair amount of crossover.
That's kind of like where I wanted to make a crossover, but not really. This wasn't to set out and make a statement with like genre or anything like that. It was just, but First Angel, Erica, who, do you know?
I don't know Erica. I know Jonna and Amanda mostly, but
I think Erica just writes for them on occasion because she's also friends with them, but she's in a great band called Working Breed, and she also works her own. She also has her own solo project, but she plays trombone, and we always, because we're kind of like the two horn players that also have like frontman presence and also like hang out with the rock people, we often get placed together as like a horn section for one-offs or something like that. Like, let's say someone's releasing a record and they want a bigger band for the record release. Like, that's happened a couple of times where we're the ones who are hit up.
Oh, interesting. Well, I know you've played with, not like as a full-time member, correct me if I'm wrong, but you hopped in with Beauty Slap and stuff too. Yeah. Like, I think about Pittsburgh being a fertile ground for the kind of jazz fusion rock band stuff, and I'm like, I'm here for it, because I love Beauty Slap, I love Starship Mantis, I love Broctopus, all those types of bands, and I'm like, good, more, please make more stuff like this.
And those guys are all just like friends, they're, or peers, co-workers, whatever. Like, right. I would feel uncomfortable and someone would hear this and be like, I'm not sure I'm your friend, Roger. But right, peers, I guess is a good way to say it. But this scene is not very big, so it sounds like everybody kind of knows everybody. So Feralcat, I think you had mentioned, was sort of like, I believe you described it as like a coming out almost. Like, it was all the musical ideas that you had wanted to kind of parse from different genres you liked and just go, here's me doing my thing. I can't, or not that I can't, but
you wanted to sing, but instead do it with a saxophone. Tell me how that idea came to be.
Well, I think the saxophone as an instrument is extremely lyrical. Like, tenor, I guess, specifically because of its range too. But when I play, I sometimes play to like the melodies, the sung melodies of songs. And I had done that for so long where I would hear the melody, or I would hear basically the notes of what they're singing and translate them to the saxophone. And that just made a lot of sense to me. And like, then I also really liked the way the saxophone as a sound blended with guitar, specifically distorted guitar. Because I'm also used to hearing it in jazz, which is a little bit different. But like, I like the way it came out with like the specific sound of sax and distorted guitar together. I don't think Feralcat like came out of, or like it was a coming out in its own right. I guess I labeled it like that. As I'm coming out with all this stuff, or like this is me with this kind of sound and this kind of sound and this kind of sound, and trying really hard not to be disjointed with everything that I'm making, and trying to make it a cohesive thing, even though there are so many things you can hear in it. For the longest time when I was in East End Mile, I made music with others, and it was always a collaborative effort, but I kind of felt like while my voice was there and it was at the front, my thoughts and my process as a creator wasn't the same. And I tried to give certain input for change in the band and like to develop certain sounds, and I just couldn't get very far with that, and I had just given up on the idea of being a like solo artist or being an artist in general. I'm like, I'm gonna be a freelancer. I'm gonna get to play music a lot. At some point, I get to play on bigger and bigger stages. Then I went to like a concert. I was invited to a concert by an emo musician named Cam Boucher. He's Cam Boucher. He was the lead singer for Sorority Noise. And I met him through his girlfriend, who was like a local photographer. But we connected, and he asked me to play on stage with him on the first leg of his tour in spirit, like to a sold out crowd. And
you had like no prepared material. Hey, come on up here,
he's
Roger.
just like, come on up. He's also a jazz musician. Like, he studied it when he was in college before deciding to be an artist. And I was like, yeah, man, for sure. Although I'm not sure what or how this works, or if this would ever work. And then I just got up there and started making noise and felt the energy. And I don't think I did anything very particularly cool that night. But like the rawness of being behind this, or being in front of this like powerhouse of guitars and bass and synthesizers, like felt so strong. And I'm like, I just want to do that. I need like powerhouse music behind me. I want to like play stadium level no matter what, even if I'm not playing stadiums, but like the big sound is what I wanted, like not so much like jazz club or anything like that. Like, so I went home and started working on something that would involve like such a big sound, and how I could put myself in front of it as a vocalist, but really as the saxophone player in place of the vocalist.
I also want to say I'm glad to hear you say that you sought out to make something very cohesive, because I forced some friends to listen to the Feralcat album, and I was like, guys, just listen to this. It's super cool. And I said, I think it's one of the first quote unquote jazz fusion records I've heard where it doesn't feel like a saxophone slapped on a layer on top of a rock band. And so if that was your aim, then I think you succeeded. And
that was my aim. I've heard a lot of, like, whenever I get comparison bands, it's always that, which you're describing. It's like a band that has a saxophone as an accessory. And I'm like, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to be the front man. Right. Yeah, like you're setting out to write the lyrics, but just not with vocals, with the saxophone. And yeah, it strikes me as very balanced, and it is not just this pastiche of
noises that you expect from a rock band with, oh, all right, yeah, he's playing sax on top of it.
Like an electric fiddle or something.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it lends itself to that just, yeah, cohesion is the right word, I think, honestly. You did mention that Feralcat, I took this right from your Spotify bio.
Sure.
It's meant to break barriers and melt faces with improvised saxophone music that you can move and mosh to. Have you ever had anybody start a mosh pit at a Feralcat show?
I've only actually had 2 shows.
Okay, but no mosh pits at either?
There was a mosh pit at the first one.
Awesome. Okay, well, I need to show up to one and start mosh pit number 2, I guess.
I would be ecstatic. Because at the second show, it was just not well attended, and that's obviously mostly my fault for promotion. But that first show, there was a lot of electric energy everywhere from audience to stage, and it was all felt everywhere, and the mosh pit was small. It didn't last very long, but it existed.
But it was there.
Yeah.
It happened. I was very surprised to see your list of influences. I guess not, maybe very surprised is a strong word, because, I listen to extremely varied genres, and I think most music lovers at some point do. But you had a lot of jazz musicians on your influence list that, I had to look up. But the people that jumped out to me were Dance Gavin Dance, Circa Survive, who Circa's one of my all-time favorite artists.
Circa's my favorite band.
I talked about that for like 8 minutes as an aside on one of my interviews. It was me and 2 other guests just doing a rundown of our favorite Circa songs, pretty much. But
oh my god, that was like my first super real concert. I was like 14 years old in New Jersey, and my group of friends was like, we're going to New York to see Circa Survive at what was then Nokia Theater. I guess it's Best Buy now. It's in Times Square. And I'm like, what is a Circa Survive? So I listened to one song, and I'm like,
best song ever.
I listened to one song, and I said I was down. It was In the Morning and Amazing.
That's my favorite album by then.
Yeah,
on Letting Go.
So it was the On Letting Go tour, as they released that album.
Killing
that's
me.
when I saw it. And so I went to see almost every tour since. I've seen them like 7 or 8 times, and I've seen Anthony on his own a couple of times.
I've never seen him solo, but I'm sure he's just as incredible.
Yeah, he's amazing all the way around. He's crazy inspirational to me. He's just seems like a wholesome human being. The way he presents himself on stage is exactly the way I want to present myself on stage. As full love for the audience and for the people around you, but I'm here to make you go fucking crazy.
Yeah. that is an apt description. I mean, I know he's had his fair share of struggles and stuff, and I mean, everyone has an off night, because I've seen him in Pittsburgh and in Cleveland, and the Cleveland show, he seemed a little not present. I don't know if something was just going on or what. But yeah,
it depends
Pittsburgh.
on how long ago it was, because he suffered from drug addiction for a while.
Right, and that's why I was like, I don't know if it's something going on with that, or if he's just having an off night, whatever. But I mean, no disrespect to Anthony Green, he's unbelievable. Does he kind of inspire you mostly from a just vocal melody standpoint? Because the guy writes amazing vocal melodies.
I mean, he's a huge part of a lot of the melodies I created were either once heard as a jazz melody and then repurposed on top of something else. So it's not, I'm stealing a lot. I steal a lot, but it's not always a direct theft, sometimes it's conceptual. But then I'll listen to singers that came out of that post-hardcore era of
I saw Polyphia and Dance Gavin Dance on there too.
Dance, Under Oath, Seosin. I just think to these super high tenors screaming over all of this crazy music, and I try and emulate that power and sound that came through, that had to be so powerful because there was so much going on behind it. Unless there were also moments where I play to my softer end, which to be honest is most of my strong suit, but this music, because I wrote it, also I developed challenges that I have to face for playing my own stuff. I have to learn how to solo well on my own music. I have to play certain parts up and certain parts down. There were so many little musician challenges that I didn't recognize I'd have. I'm but I made this. Why is this hard?
This shouldn't be hard. I created it.
Yeah.
I haven't really thought about that either. Actually, I mean, I'm thinking about how much like technical death metal I listen to, and then you're Facebook friends with some of these people, and they're going on tour, and they're like, God, why did I write such a fucking hard guitar solo? Like, how do like how? Why? Like, okay, I can put it into Guitar Pro, but my fingers can't even do that. Like, why would I do this? This is so stupid.
I like the idea of giving myself a challenge. Like one of the songs I wrote in like a deeply uncomfortable key for me. Just so like, not just for this, it actually came out naturally, but I'm happy it did because now I have to be good at playing this key if I'm ever going to play this song again.
I mostly, when I did still actively play sax, I mostly played alto. That's what I started on. I only got to screw around on tenor for a little bit, but I always found tenor really challenging because it's just, I don't know, there's just this strength to that instrument. It's just like harder to control. It is just harder to control, and some of those like lower register notes are just really a stretch, and I have
a lot more trouble. Sorry, because I play alto when I teach music.
Okay.
And I also play alto in a Latin band locally, so because I'm going from tenor to alto, there's like a whole doubling struggle. But I find that it's harder to get consistency out of an alto saxophone. Not just because of my own like inhibitions or my own insufficiencies, but more, I don't know. I feel like the tenor is actually really balanced, and the alto is kind of like mostly balanced. Certain notes on an alto saxophone, no matter who plays them, I don't like them.
Yeah, it's kind of true. I mean, embouchure wise or not, like, yeah, that's true. I actually sold my saxophone about a year ago, but like I never got far enough with it to learn like altissimo stuff and like some of the tricky, I didn't ever learn how to circular breathe and stuff, but there's like, you think of these jazz greats who can just conquer an instrument, and I mean, are you teaching those kinds of like crazy upper level concepts to extremely ambitious jazz students, or are you doing more like this is how you blow into the saxophone? That one? Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any extremely ambitious jazz students.
No prodigies yet.
No, I have a couple of students who are really doing well, but...
What's the age group you're teaching again?
I have students all over the place, but my oldest is 15.
Oh, okay.
But my youngest is like 7, so... It's vastly different. Like I could be going one lesson, I'm literally teaching them how to put the neck strap on, and then the next lesson we're going through like complicated etudes for auditions, and each of them presents its own challenge, obviously, but I don't have anyone as of right now that studies with me that I'm teaching like dedicated or like deliberate small things in technique, or like extended technique like altissimo, or I don't know how to circular breathe. That's not
confession. Wow.
No,
I figured see, that's what you have to learn to be called a capital J jazz musician, I guess.
No, there's like there's a handful of people who can do it. Not everyone can. Like that's relatively uncommon, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I've been proven wrong. I just figured once you get to a certain point, like in the jazz world,
that's
it's you gotta know how to do it.
That's what you get to as like a higher technique. Now, there's some people, like there's this one guy locally who is dynamite. He moved in from New York a little while ago, maybe just over a year ago, and he has so much ridiculous technique on the saxophone. Like he plays solo shows for like 45 minutes to an hour, where he's doing things I've never imagined with that instrument. Like, and yes, he can circular breathe, and he's got all the altissimo, but I'm saying it goes well beyond that. And I've like, to the point where like inspired is an understatement. I'm looking at that and I'm like, I made like an ugly, like, I have no idea what's happening, my brain broke face.
Well, it's like Feralcat. It's supposed to melt your face, so he's doing that to you, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's people that are gonna do that to me, hopefully for the rest of my life. If there's ever a point in time where I don't get my face melted, then I should probably quit music.
Is well, that in conjunction with some of the other things you said, it seems like you have a pretty open-minded philosophy towards learning and just, humility as a musician. But is there kind of an underlying philosophy when it comes to teaching that you always try to promote?
I'm actually kind of a stickler for having good technique early. And that I still try and make it interesting and worthwhile and fun for younger students, but ultimately I want to make sure that if you're going to keep playing, that you start off with the right, like at least this much of the toolkit, and then like we can start being more expressive and creative. So there's like a baseline, and I'm always finding myself like catching technical things and spending time explaining technique. And I'm not a very technical musician, so that's like, it's kind of weird that that's what I gravitate towards. I'm just like being honest here, because I think I understand technique more than I put it into practice myself. And it makes me reflect and then practice the things that I like. I have to practice what I preach, basically. But like I also definitely don't teach to a genre or to like a goal of being a jazz musician or anything like that, especially with saxophone players. No, like what most students don't know what they like, but what do you like isn't often a question, or what kind of music are you into? And if there's no real response here, I'll just give options. So
to your students,
yeah,
you mean? Okay.
So that there's like at least like a tasting ground, so you can see, oh, I'm interested in playing in that style, or I'm interested in playing that style. Because as a sax player, I felt pigeonholed into jazz music, even though there's like a world of different things you can do with the saxophone. I just felt if I was going to be good, I have to be in jazz. And I find myself now just picking up different things from different genres all the time while still studying jazz. So it's important to have breadth, I think.
Yeah. I think your inspiration list is really interesting, because I had to look up some of these jazz musicians, and I know some of the ones you mentioned, they're definitely, like, when you check them out on Spotify, they're kind of at the forefront of experimental jazz, experimental metal, like what you listed Daughters.
Yeah.
And Daughters is like such a nuts, crazy band that has pretty much nothing to do with jazz.
Absolutely not. Daughters is recent to me. My brother, who mixed and produced the album, the Feralcat album, he's way more into like metal, hardcore, and like prog than I am. So he was like, he's been on a Daughters kick for like 7 months, and I've been ignoring it until he finally came and visited me and just like put it on in the car, and I was like,
what is this?
Like literally, like my jaw dropped. I'm just in shock at how this is happening to my ears. And yeah, I was so excited. I'm like, I have to make everything noisy now.
Yeah, it's out there. I haven't really listened to a lot of Daughters myself, but that's funny. You said, oh, I was just ignoring his recommendation, and then it just struck me. Like, that's how I feel like everybody I know talks about Daughters. They're like, no, you have to listen to this. Like, it's the weirdest, craziest shit you've ever heard. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll get to it. It's in my backlog, but...
That's kind of... When people recommend movies or television to me, as like, you have to watch it, that's almost a surefire way I won't.
Correct.
Like, you have to goad me into it. You have to butter me into it, and or be very casual. Like, oh, you should check it out.
Are you a music recommender yourself?
No.
Interesting.
No.
See, I love that.
I very rarely make even like playlists or something. I have a very like personal taste in music, and I also don't get asked very often like what I like, unless it's for interviews or stuff like that. So when I'm talking with my friends, there's no, hey guys, what kind of music are you into?
Right.
We just kind of go by whatever is mutual. So
that makes sense.
With anyone outside of that, well, what kind of music are you into? I'm gonna default, because I have a saxophone on my back, jazz.
Right. Oh, John Coltrane. Yeah.
Which is natural, but also like, it's because I can't explain to this 60-year-old that I've been listening to Under Oath and The Devil Wears Prada since I was like a teenager, and that makes a difference, Well,
let me ask you then about, I'm going to pronounce this wrong. Is it bachata? Bachata music?
Bachata.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're second generation family of folks from the Dominican Republic, correct?
Yes.
And your dad was a pop star.
At
kind
some
of.
point, yeah.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about that and kind of what your dad's role in your musical upbringing was.
I think he wouldn't necessarily like it if I if I talked about him being a pop star, quote unquote. He says it like this, like he describes it like this, but what I know and what I understand is that in the like mid 60s, right around the time Beatles are becoming popular and all this stuff, rock music had just kind of landed in the Dominican Republic. And my father, as a like 14-year-old guitarist, created one of the first, if not the first, like rock band, quote unquote, in the Dominican Republic. So he played shows with his band while he was a teenager. I think he describes like specific show where he was playing for a beauty pageant.
Okay.
And like his band was playing and there were just screaming girls all over the place. Like describing the rock star life like completely as like a 15-year-old. And I mean, he ended up going to college and still playing music after that, but like while he was in that pop band, he was a rock star. Or while he was in that rock band in the Dominican Republic, he was supposedly a rock star.
Did it just like fold, or kind of the culture just changed and they sort of culturally moved on? Or
you know what? I never actually asked him how it ended. My assumption is that he went to college, or like some other opportunities arose. I really don't know. You know what? I'm gonna ask my dad why they broke up.
Okay. Did he come to the U.S. to go to college?
No. He went to college in the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
My mom they met in college there. My mom also got a master's degree, but she got it in the United States.
Cool.
But no, my dad moved after college. I think it was like 4 years after, something like that.
Yeah, I looked that up, and I was just thinking, like, thinking about how your parents play such a role a lot of times just in your musical taste. But having a dad who was a one-time rock star, probably. I mean,
that's more of a story than it is like an actual affect on anything that happened when we grew up. Like there's no royalties.
Yeah.
There's no big posters. Like the only existence of it is in his story. So.
It kind of makes me think of the movie Coco. Just
a
little bit. Like, just for a couple days I was in this kick-ass band.
But oops.
Did your parents play a lot of music like while you were growing up? You said you have a brother, right? So was it a very musical household?
Yeah, actually it was a very musical household. Grandfather was a musician. My uncle was a freelancer and they both played in like salsa bands for a long time. And so I was always surrounded by this culture of music, but most of it is just innate to like being Dominican. And I didn't like when I was growing up, because I grew up in the suburbs, I didn't like really take that, In fact, I kind of rejected it when I was growing up, especially as a young man. Like I took on like American music, metal, rock, like rap music, all these things to basically try and get away from the things that I'd heard all my life, which were like dance music from the Caribbean and like Latin jazz and whatever else. I just didn't have any appreciation for it. And also I was trying so hard to fit in as an American. Right. And more so less as an American because I was an American. Like it took very little time for that fitting in, but I was always like a dork. So like me trying to fit in meant me changing what I liked in music, but I also didn't have a taste in music until I feel like I grew into middle school. Like I didn't like music. I didn't listen to anything until I was in middle school. That's when I started to see the kids with band shirts. I was like, Mom, can I go to Hot Topic? Like,
and that must be how you picked up your love of dorky things like Pokemon, perhaps?
I mean, I played video games since I was like 3.
Okay.
But yeah, I was never like around a lot of people, or like I wasn't necessarily crazy social. I had friends, but I wasn't a socialite, and I was terrible at sports. So going outside meant like potentially feeling humiliated. But I was good at video games, and to my parents' dismay, like I wanted to play them all the time, and they put a lot of like strict boundaries, especially when I was younger. I played a lot with my brother, but I think they've like I've adapted them now as an adult because I still play video games. I've adapted them not only as a part of my personality, but as a part of my creativity, because I can not just like look back at the nostalgia of my youth, but I now understand like that music that I heard in those soundtracks is important. Like I hear it in my palate. Like I know that this game composer came up with this line that directly influenced part of my music. So now I'm like, can I write it off on my taxes?
Yeah. Well, of course I bring that up because you had said that you promise that on every album you write, you're going to name at least one song after a water Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
And for anyone listening, you cannot see us obviously right now, but I have my ancient he's 19. I have a 19-year-old Squirtle plush sitting next to Roger right now because on the Feralcat album the opening track actually is called Squirtle Squad.
Yeah.
Squirtle Squad, let me enunciate that better. So I think it's great that you incorporate that kind of like nostalgic playfulness. And I mean, heck, my last interviewees talked about like the bass player or the drummer said he started playing drums basically because he wanted to play the bass line from the Toe Jam and Earl video games. And like
sick.
and you know, and like I grew up as a video game playing kid too, and I think there's still kind of this maybe bias against them as they're not seen as a legitimate art perhaps.
Yeah.
Both from the creative side and the hobby side and then just the soundtrack side. But I mean, some of the greatest albums I've ever listened to are video game soundtracks. It's so unfair. It's so unfair to not treat them with the respect they deserve, I guess.
It's stigmatized because it was like this almost counterculture, you know. Video gamers aren't the type that go out to sports arenas or I mean, even if you do enjoy that, that's not like the image of a gamer, you know. And I guess it was maybe the image was what brought everything down or something like that, but I don't know. I think video games are starting to be more represented as like art form, especially like I've recently got Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I know I'm very late on this.
No, I was very late with it too, but what a game.
But like, I mean, first of all, there were moments when I was listening to the soundtrack where I'm like, yo, write this down. But also it was just beautiful and inspiring, and I was like, and I actually enjoyed the story this time, and it was crazy to me that like you can look at that and think of it as like a toy. This is a masterpiece, you know?
Yeah, it's a book but in playable form, kind of.
And it's a lot of it is an adventure that you choose, but like first of all, I heard this from my brother where my dad kind of reconciled a little bit and said, you know what? I now see the problem-solving value of the video games you played.
Good on your dad.
And good on your dad. That's right. Because now I'm sitting through some of these puzzles, and I'm like, I used to do this stuff as a kid. You know, this is hard.
I just last night I finally repurchased my own PS4 after my ex and I split. I no longer had a PS4, so it was like kind of it was kind of like killing me slowly. I was like, no, I have to finish a couple games that I left off, and I finally purchased the Spyro trilogy. Ooh. And I'm sitting here going, how the hell did I figure out how to go here when I was 8? Like this is hard, you know. It's challenging.
That's like Spyro is awesome and hard.
Yeah, it has one of the greatest soundtracks probably ever created. I think
I haven't played that in too long. Now I'm gonna go back.
Go
to Spyro.
home, go home and play it. It's great soundtrack, great game, obviously. But do you have any ideas on what your next water Pokemon track will be?
I mean, the natural progression would be Totodile.
Oh, so it would hop all the starters.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as of now, in my head, it's starters.
So you'd have to write at least 8 Feralcat albums.
Yeah, each of them with a different water starter. No, I have other water type Pokemon that I think of, but like I really want the title to come. Like, you know, I'm thinking about Pokemon for some reason. I'm actually waiting for Sword and Shield to come out.
Oh, yeah.
So that I can start thinking in Pokemon again. And be like, and I have a bunch of the old games too, so every once in a while I'll go back and touch on it. But like, yeah, I'm hoping that a spark comes out. Like right now my head is filled with Meryl for some reason. Like those that like little like ball Pokemon.
Yep.
And then Lapras, which is gigantic and beautiful. And I don't know. There's a few of these like, you know, what's it called? They're not characters. What, I guess, models, whatever.
Sprites.
Sprites. Yeah. A few of these Pokemon that were just really cool looking. Mm-hmm. But I kind of want the story, because Squirtle Squad has a very distinct story.
Oh,
not like the music as much as this like actual episode.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna ask, do you mean the actual storyline behind the Squirtle Squad?
Yeah.
For any of the '90s kids listening, they're all going through their head like, I know exactly what you're talking about right now.
Yeah, but perhaps for anyone alienated, Squirtle Squad was it's somewhere between the 5th and the 15th episode of Pokemon ever. So, and this was when he met his companion Squirtle, but it was a part of, like, the Squirtle was part of this gang, and he was, like, just not having the protagonist Ash at all. But then at the end, like, they reconciled, and then they were fast friends, and he had these cool shades.
Yeah, they have the cool triangle glasses. I just remember, like, when I found your album, and I just see that the first track is called Squirtle Squad, it was immediately like, there is no way I won't like this. Just, there's no way. Squirtle's always been my favorite. Okay, that's enough about Squirtle, I guess.
Yeah,
but,
that was a lot of Pokemon.
lot of video game chat. Hey, that's what I'm here for. I always like hearing, you know, where people get their inspiration. But I guess 2 or 3 more kind of generic questions before I wind down. But what would your biggest piece of advice be for people who kind of want to take the same track as you, or they might come from a background that's in a completely different field from music, or, you know, it's a hobby they develop later in life? What would you tell people who want to pursue it?
Don't bullshit it.
Don't bullshit it.
Yeah, that's like this thing. Like I've said this in, I guess, different forms of, like, don't be afraid to fail, or like fail hard. Don't bullshit it. And like, music takes so much of you. Like, there's a reason why it's so difficult to like hold on to or start families or have families as musicians and stuff like that. And not saying not to do that, and not saying that is like impossible or anything like that, but the reason is because it takes so much out of you. It will take stuff out of you while you have a day job. It'll take stuff out of you when you don't. Like, it just continues to suck your life dry. And if I'm not selling this well, it's because I'm not trying to. This is not for the weak. This is not for the faint of heart. If you want to do it because you enjoy it, then please do it because you enjoy it. But if you want a career in it, you better bust your balls.
I like that. I guess another thing to ask then would be, I didn't even think about this because you studied engineering, and all these typically, you know, the super cerebral versus the creative. What is your take on the whole left brain, right brain thing?
I've thought about it before, and then I've looked at stuff about it, but I don't think about it very much. Maybe I would, but I've always, like, whenever I took those like Facebook tests, I usually got 50-50, which I felt pretty nice about. But I also, when someone's like, are you type A or type B? I'm like, I think I'm somewhere in the middle, because I like my organization, but I also like to sit down and do nothing all the time. So there's a mixture, and I don't think it could be so black and white as like left brain and right brain. I know there's cognitive functions that are attributed to each hemisphere of the brain. That's not what I'm saying. Whatever this like psychological part is, I think it's just a mixture, and I can't clearly define it.
I just wasn't sure if you ever felt like you're sort of, and granted, I'm making a lot of assumptions about engineers, but because I'm not an engineer, but I imagine you probably have a very mechanical side, perhaps, and then, you know, I wasn't sure if that ever has like hindered or if it helps your musical side.
Well, I learned a lot of like project management skills, and a lot of like the things that came from engineering that I still apply are mostly the soft skills that I acquired, like networking and building not just the relationships with my peers, but with other people that are working in the industry, spending time researching and writing papers, and like helped me with like my professional writing skills to be able to do grants and stuff. So that always trickles. Am I like sort of this anal retentive, like or right brain person, whichever one it is that's like super strict?
I think right.
Yeah, no, because I've never really been type A. I've always thought a lot. I've always used my resources. I like spreadsheets.
Oh, good.
Stuff like that.
Team spreadsheet.
Yeah. So it's there. I guess it was always like there as like I can pick it up and use it whenever I want, but I don't necessarily attribute a lot of my creative process to that part of me. That's like how I get it done. And then the why and the what and the who and the every other question is the other side of it, where I mostly reside.
Yeah, no, fascinating answer. I was just like, I'm wondering if there's some crazy organization skill he has unlocked from doing that, but not necessarily.
I wish. If I do, I will invite you to the Todd Talk, whatever. Knockoff TED Talk.
The seminar Todd Talk. I like that. What is the reason you named your project Feralcat? I believe you told me you are allergic to cats.
I am allergic to cats. Sometimes I'm worse than other times, but I also currently live with a cat, so my allergies have gotten a lot better.
Oh, good.
In general. So cat is a word that jazz musicians have historically used to refer to one another. So
cool
always
cat.
Talking about, cool cats. Hey, that cat can really play. You see that cat over there? Like, et cetera, ad infinitum. But feral, because I felt like an outsider in that world. So I felt like an abandoned child by jazz, because like I grew up I grew into learning it, and it was like the ultimate. It is the best kind of music that exists, and I basically came into myself thinking I still have a lot to learn, and I still have to get better at everything I do. I still don't feel true mastery over what I do, but it doesn't have to be so black and white that this is the pathway towards the justice of music. Like, I think there could be multiple routes, and I think that the best way to get to these routes is actually to not throw away the constructs at all, but to have one step forward and one step back, to know your history, to understand it, and to live it such that like it influences the way you think and like the process of creation, but also be looking ahead and always understand that there is something more that you can do. Like, everything that has existed is not the best that ever will.
That is a profound takeaway, I think.
I hope. I don't know. Actually, I mean, no, I didn't go into this trying to make profound statements.
Well, I ask questions that kind of lead up to, like, tell me something super deep about your artistic development, But I don't know. Everyone always has a different perspective on it. And I guess I'll flip that question on its head and ask you, what's maybe the most important lesson you've ever been taught from, either a fellow musician or, like, anyone in your life? I guess like a good guiding, one big guiding lesson.
Like a guiding principle?
Sure.
Honestly, I feel like this goes against everything I just said, but study the greats.
That's fair.
Learn from everything that already exists, and I guess this is like the teacher in me that says that more than anything else. But like, there's so much that does already exist out there. That doesn't mean do what they did, because they already did it, but like study it, understand it, learn it inside out, so that, or at least the things that really affect you, not just anything. If you're not really affected by anything, then refer back to my "don't bullshit this" comment. But if you are really truly affected by something, learn it in and out, so that like you could recreate it. And if you continue to study that, realistically, you just start to develop your own ideas within that same like mind frame, and you create your own thing. It's just like sometimes it just happens because you are studying too hard.
Yeah, I mean, through inspiration comes synthesis, I guess, in a sense. Well, then you're really gonna hate my last question.
Oh, okay.
It's my MO now, so I have to do it. But if you could only live the rest of your life listening to 3 albums, what would they be?
Oh, dang, that's so tough. I want to think of albums that I go back to consistently and that have like never failed me. Oh, yeah, I got one. Pretty Odd by Panic at the Disco.
Oh, is that like the one with all the hits?
No, it's their second record.
Okay.
I listened to that album backwards and forwards so many times. I mean, the first one with all the hits is also one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. But if I had to choose between those two albums, I'm not going to choose two Panic at the Disco albums. So
yeah.
So the one that honestly most people hate and despise, but I love that album. I think it sounds great. It's really reminiscent of Beatles and the Beach Boys. Another album, I want to like pick a jazz musician that has stuck with me forever, and that's probably gonna be Aaron Parks' Invisible Cinema.
I'm not jazz education enough to know, but
this guy's album, this came out in like 2009, I want to say, but it was sort of my turning point. I listened to that album and I was like, how is this jazz? But it felt like jazz, but it wasn't necessarily jazz, but it was like piano driven, but it felt like indie music. And it was super cool to like hear this virtuosic jazz indie interpretation of music. And I could listen to that. Like, these aren't necessarily my favorite albums. These are albums that, like, if I had to put them on repeat for the rest of my life, I definitely could. And Juan Luis Guerra's Grandes Éxitos, which is Greatest Hits.
Okay. And
he is a Dominican, like, merengue, bachata, salsa writer and, like, legendary artist. He's still in his 50s right now, but for the impact that he's made on contemporary Latin music, it's astounding. Like, he has hits over hits over hits, but outside of that, his music is like a staple of my childhood. And I've been listening to it since I was a young kid, and I could listen to it forever.
That is a great way to answer that question. Because some people like to go, oh, well, if I'm going to be stuck on a desert island, like, I really want the variety of something weird, but I don't know. That's how I answer it.
I mean, like, it was still varied. I was like, here's a jazz.
Yeah, right.
Here's a, like, pop rock album, and then some Latin music.
Got to keep it fresh.
Yeah.
Other than that, Roger, thank you so much for spending your Monday with me. And
well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right, that wraps up my interview with Feralcat. Make sure to keep an eye on him on social media. I just have a feeling that he's going to be up to some great things. Additionally, if you want to search for Feralcat everywhere you can search for music, feel free to type in Feralcat, but some of his social media accounts are spelled with a 3, so that would be F3RALCAT, I believe on Instagram and Twitter. Also, feel free to check out Roger's podcast that he hosts with his friend Jamie called What Do You Do Again? I believe they're on Apple Music right now and some other streaming services. So, hope you enjoyed the interview. As always, till next time.